This is number 5 in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It's significant that the argument that begins the Rime of the Ancient Mariner of Coleridge and Wordsworth is how a ship having crossed the line. Very similar in some ways to the old man in the sea, in which Santiago, the old man, said, I went out too far. I went out too far. And then as a result of that, this is where the catastrophe, the tragedy emerges in the old man in the sea. One of the things about the albatross, of course, which is a significant metaphor, at the end of 4, the albatross drops off. The mariner's neck falls into the sea like lead. It's very interesting that the albatross as a metaphor can mean one or two things. The albatross can be the light that guides, the bird that, like a North Star, a compass, leads people into meaning, to purpose. But when they cross the line, the dark side of the albatross has a double metaphorical meaning in the history of literature and of thought and of culture and philosophy. There's also the dark side to the metaphor as well. And in that sense, the mariner indulged the dark side by crossing the line, but going to places he and the ship should not have gone. Now, what are ways in which the albatross itself, the dark side of the albatross, and that element of the albatross, which people can become victims of, slaves of? So the obvious vice side, the negative side, that part of the albatross which can lead people off the waters into places which are destructive for themselves and others, is when people in their journey through life, circumstances through life, are betrayed. They have people they once trusted, that they turn on them, where there's situations in life where people seem to be going in the same place, but those they thought they could trust are ones that start aligning themselves with others, and a person can then feel isolated. As a result of that, bitterness, anger, poisons, toxins can get in. That's the dark side of the albatross. And when that part of the albatross hung around the mariner's neck, he himself, through various forms of turning to darkness itself, the snake, and here you get the snake and the albatross come together in a very, very interesting way at the end of number 4. And he knows, he blesses that, and out of that, the slithering, the poisonous, that which can destroy, is itself destroyed, and the albatross falls into the water, which begins number 5 of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner itself. And so always understanding how within human nature itself, as Plato rightly understood, there are these two sides. There's the dark side, the dark horse, and depending on what horse is pulling us, the white or the dark horses will take us to different places. And it's the same in the old man in the sea. In that sense, much hinges. People start in their life, they take their little boats out into the cove, and they pull in little fish in the search for how they're to live, what is worth doing. But the more a person goes on in life, sometimes they get out of that cove and then they get into the bigger fish. And for of course, the old man, it becomes the marlin itself. And the bigger the fish, or the bigger the issue that's being struggled with in life, and particularly if it's something that's good and important, inevitably the sharks come in. And the sharks will turn up with their sharp teeth and start tearing the flesh off those who are trying to bring in the big issues of life in a meaningful manner. And this is many ways like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner as well. This and the old man in the sea and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner have lots of affinities. But to begin with section 5 in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Coleridge brings together a combination, a constellation of images, because the mariner, first of all, on his journey, made decisions, killed the albatross, and what as a result of that, he goes into places in which he has to live with the consequences of making certain decisions. And so a dryness settles within for him. And then when you hit section 4 or 5, the first image which is used is rain. and the rains start coming back, and there's moisture and there's nutrition begins to settle into the soil, and the soil of the soul. And so what's happening in this turn at the end of section 4 is the rains recloud, the clouds open up, and there's no more the desert within. And it is at the desert within, the dryness within, that is now the shift is taken care of. So that's the first image which Coleridge is going to use in section 5. Is the change from the desert, the dryness within, to increasingly moisture and increasingly the nutrition and what the rains bring to the soil and the soil of the soul itself. The second would be the winds. He talks about the roaring wind, the coming wind, the strong wind. This again is if a person is in a place of paralysis and they don't know how to navigate and the ship of their soul is going nowhere whatsoever. When they made that decision to bless, to be kind to that which is very hard to, sometimes seen as the enemy, but as that gushes forth, as it were, the wind, which is always the metaphor of the spirit, begins to blow the ship of their soul. And so they're no more stuck, frozen, paralyzed on the water of time, but in fact there's movement now, there's creativity, they're starting to move out, and so the health and the healing is returning to the soul after the parched period, the desert period, and the paralysis, impotence period of the journey. So the wind is beginning to blow them as well. You also get the levels of light in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Often in the beginning, of course, the great light is the sun, in which we see through the light of that strong light. The secondary light is the moon, and the lesser light is the stars. And in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, increasingly you move from the bright to the moon, to the stars, and then of course into darkness itself. And as move through number 5, another metaphor, increasingly the sun is rising, the light of the sun is emerging, and the lesser lights of the moon and the stars increasingly are weakening, and the mariner and those on the ship are beginning to see with a fullness of light, not secondary light or tertiary light, but in fact they're beginning to see in a much clearer and cleaner way as they're moving across the water. So between the moistening of the soul again, and the wind of the spirit which is blowing them, and the light is beginning to emerge, we can see the mariners on the ship. The next, which would be the fourth thing in section 5, is relationships are being healed. So that which was dead, where there was not meaningful interaction with others on the ship or in the communities in that sense because of choices made, the mariner's choice is beginning to revive, renew relationships again, which had been broken, in which people had become disoriented, in which people didn't trust one another anymore. So in section 5, you begin to see the people being resurrected. They're coming back to life again. Trust is emerging once again on the ship. And this is very, very significant as well. And so the healing, and you also get the daylight dawn. Also nature, which was the fifth element in this 5 section, is nature which seemed to be killing, in which there was less and less light, in which there was a dry place, in which there was no wind, the ship was going nowhere. All of a sudden nature becomes verdant again, the song of the birds, the song of spring. June is coming into the soil, into relationships, and this whole change which is occurring as a result of the mariner having to face those parts of himself in which he had killed the best, that which was within him, and then the negative side of the albatross, which had infected he and all his relationships and friends. And so you get nature itself beginning to become revivified. It's like the spring has entered into the soil of not only the mariner, but also the many sailors on the ship as well. You get the wedding guest as agreeing. At this point, the wedding guest is beginning to become alert, attentive to that perhaps the story that the mariner is telling may deepen, may impact me. I should be listening, because where I was going will not take me to where I need to go in terms of in terms of life's journey. So in The Old Man and the Sea, the young boy who's constantly eager to listen to Santiago, the old man, the wedding guest now is beginning to find his way to really, there's wisdom in the Ancient Mariner, and perhaps I should be sitting still and actually listening to the story of the sadder but the wiser person. And often wisdom and sadness often come together in an understanding of the journey itself. As we go through 5 again, the spirit and the wind is very, very much guiding. Now the water is an image. The water is an image when used in poetry and literature often of the sub and the unconscious. And so there's our conscious reality in which we deal with external experiences, relationships, situation in life in which we cognitively or imaginatively try and sort things out. But then there's also the sub and the unconscious, which can play, and this often will come out in dreams, in which deeper levels speak to us. And in part of section 5, you can see the spirit and the water and deeper beginning to move the ship of the soul. And Coleridge is playing with his metaphors, both with the conscious element of life, but the sub and unconscious, and what begins to move the ship from a still, a frozen place in which relationships and nature and everything is unhinged and not moving anywhere. The final part, which is very interesting, he said, I heard and in my soul discerned 2 voices in the air. Coleridge then moves in the latter part of 5 to the inner dialogue, which often takes place in people's lives between should I have done what I did, perhaps an overly tender conscience, a critical element, a judgmental side. Well, what I have done was inappropriate. I should be judged for what I've done. How do I suffer for what I've done? So there's one voice which is very much a part which is judging, criticizing, demanding, and depending on how tender a person's conscience is, they can feel paralyzed yet once again by a voice of judgment and criticism. But there's this other voice as well, as it says, the other was a softer voice, as soft as honey dew. Quoth he, the man has penance done, and penance more will do. And so there's 2 voices, and often within a person, depending on how alert they are to their own inner life, there's often not only 2, there can be many voices at work in dealing with decisions made at a moral, at a conscience level, and should I have done that? And then people can beat themselves up pretty rigorously if they have a tender conscience. But the issue is also listening to the mercy side, the tender side. The other side is be kindly with yourself. And everything hinges on what side of a person or what part of a person they're actually going to listen to, because that will determine either their health, their healing, or increasingly feeling incriminated, judged by what has been done, and that can be a bugbear in a person's back. And it's like it's the section 5 ends with this element of what part of a person is a person going to listen to. Very, very similar to the Old Man of the Sea. Be careful what fish you reel in, and if the big ones are reeled in, be careful when the sharks come. And of course the irony of Santiago, the Old Man of the Sea, by the time he gets the big Maryland back into the cove of the little Cuban village, the sharks have eaten all the flesh from the marlin, and all that is left is the ribs and the head of the marlin. And so the Old Man in the Sea is very, very much, has a lot of affinity in different ways with the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. One is about be careful what is being reeled in, and of course in the Old Man in the Sea, the ongoing struggle, the slow motion of slowly playing with the big issues, the big ideas, going slow with it, but then finally when he got the marlin, of the important issues, the sharks turn up at that level. What Coleridge then is trying to get at in some ways is there is, when the albatross went down, is that the change to when particular the albatross is something thought of in terms of something important and good, just not something crude, of negative attitudes within, of the poison that very much can paralyze a person. So the darkness then indeed often conceals itself in light. It clothes itself attractively. It uses important issues like justice and peace and ecological concerns and many others, hot button issues in the culture wars. This is why section 5 ends with knowing how to discern what is going on, not only at a material level, but often the motivations that move different people and tribes and issues in the trendy issues of the culture wars. So as he says, I heard in my soul discern two voices in the air, not only those voices external, but the voices in the soul. And so Coleridge is alerting people, hopefully to know what voices to listen to, or to use Hemingway, which fish to reel in, and in the process not be taken in and yet kill another good albatross, the better element of the albatross itself, or how to avoid the sharks in that sense. When we move into section 6 of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it starts with this internal dialogue of the soul, the first voice, the second voice, the first voice, the second voice. So Coleridge is moving in section 6 to the internal dialogue of a person's life as they grapple with being pulled in different directions, and in that process trying to discern what direction leads to truth, goodness, and beauty in that very best sense. And so it's really about the formation of the soul and the multiple voices that can go on within, and discerning the voice that in fact leads both the individual, the mariner, the friendships, the community in a meaningful direction, so the ship truly goes to the place of light and life on the journey itself.